Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this panel session on preparing leaders and the workforce for the future of work. As mentioned earlier today, just to share a few of the house rules, we seek participants' cooperation not to record the sessions or reproduce the content without the presenters or the panelists' agreement. The organizers, however, may record the session for publicity and archival purposes. Nonetheless, for non-sensitive content, you are free to and encouraged to share your experience and thoughts on our social media, and don't forget to hashtag ACOP 2022. Secondly, you will be viewing this on the conference platform, and you are free to add in your comments in the chat function. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties with the conference online platform, you may also reach out to the organizing team in the chat. Thirdly, if you have questions that you want to ask the panelists later in the panel discussion, please type them in the Q&A panel instead. This means that comments are for the chat function, whereas questions are for the Q&A function. For the questions, you may also wish to upvote questions posed by others that you would like to have answered. So for further information on how to navigate the conference platform, you may access a self-help guide that has been uploaded onto the platform. Thank you. So just to formally introduce myself, I'm Yen Lin, psychologist with the Police Psychological Services Department at the Singapore Police Force. I will be the moderator for this evening's 1-hour panel session on preparing leaders and the workforce for the future of work. In this session, our panelists will be sharing with us their insights regarding the impact of the pandemic on organizations and the workforce. We will also be hearing from them best practices in sustaining staff resilience, engagement, and development amidst these changing times. Our panelists today consist of practitioners from the private and public sector, as well as esteemed academic, who will be sharing their perspectives from different angles, and we hope that this will provide a holistic understanding of this topic. So without further ado, it is my privilege to introduce the panelists who are with us today. Our first panelist is Mr. Anwar Abdullah, Chief Executive of the Home Team Academy at the Ministry of Home Affairs Singapore. As the Chief Executive, Mr. Anwar steers Home Team Academy's ongoing transformation into a digitally powered and future-ready corporate university of the Home Team, with a strong emphasis on a culture of safety and people development. Prior to his current appointment, Mr. Anwar had served with the Singapore Civil Defence Force for 27 years and was a Deputy Commissioner, Operations and Resilience. Let's invite Mr. Anwar to turn off. Our second panelist, who had also delivered the earlier keynote presentation, is Dr. Eunei Cho, Assistant Professor at the Department of Business Administration, College of Commerce at National Cheng Chi University. Dr. Eunei Cho is an industrial organizational psychologist who specializes in occupational health and well-being. Her research program focuses on health implications of multiple role engagement throughout the lifespan and various individual and organizational factors that shape the work-life balance. Let's welcome Dr. Eunei. Our third panelist is Dr. Koh Chee Wee, Director, Leadership Innovation at the Public Service Division in Singapore. Dr. Koh served as a psychologist in the SPF for 7 years before switching to a human resources career in the Singapore Public Service. He holds a PhD in Industrial Organizational Psychology and is currently in a leadership development role. Let's welcome Dr. Koh. Our fourth and final panelist is Ms. Wendy Tan, Managing Partner of Flame Center. An entrepreneur, author, and speaker, Ms. Tan's work in learning, innovation, and career development has won the InnovPlus Spark and HRO Today Thought Leadership Awards. She has worked with numerous multinational corporations in the Asia-Pacific region and government agencies in her career, and her work has also been extensively published. Let's welcome Ms. Wendy. So thank you, panelists, for being with us today. Now, before hearing from the panelists, I would like to do a very quick check-in activity with our audience here tonight. Since we are discussing on the future of work, can I ask all of you in the audience to just freely type in the chat, what is one word that comes to your mind when you think about the future workplace? So feel free to start keying your responses in the chat section. And I'll be curious to hear from all of you what it is. So while we await the responses, maybe for me, I will just kick off this discussion. The one word that came to my mind is change. I believe all of us are aware of the saying, the only thing that is constant is change. But I think in the past 2 years, this saying has really hit us in the face in the pandemic. The number of changes and the pace of change that we must deal with both at work and in our personal lives are tremendous. And I think this will continue, having to change up the way we work and to be able to continue to adapt to the changes will be something that's key for the workforce. So right now, I'll be really curious to see what are some of the one word that you have put up. Yeah, I see some which says tech integrated. Indeed, we have been talking a lot about technology. Even in the public service, we have transformation relating to technology. Digitization is also something that is very popular and very common right now. And even more so that we need to integrate them into the way we work. Hybrid. Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Flexibility, indeed. Futuristic, disruption, metaverse. That's interesting, metaverse. That's from Shixian, thank you. Let's see whether there are any more coming right up through the chat. Okay, I think as all of us get into this whole context of trying to think about what is the future of work, I think right now it's timely for me now to actually kick off this evening discussion with a question that I would like to pose to our panelists tonight, which is, having undergone over 2 years of pandemic, the work setting has undergone many changes. In your area of research or course of work, what have these changes been? And more importantly, how can leaders and organizations stay prepared for the future of work? Maybe may I first invite Mr. Anwar to share with us. Mr. Anwar, please.
Yes, Yanlin, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Mr. Anwar.
All right, Yanlin, thanks a lot, and very good evening to all of you from Singapore and other parts of the world. Just let me start by saying that indeed the future of work is here, really, thanks to COVID. It arrived faster than what we expected. So for the last 2.5 years, indeed, it has been challenging. And I just want to connect back to what Dr. Yuni mentioned during her presentation. There is a massive changes in terms of where we were previously and where we are today. But the certain fundamentals still remain the same. Okay, we are still grappling with the need to balance between the work and the non-work. We still need to grapple with the responsibility, be it at work and be at home, and being socially responsible to the public. What I wanted to share is that I'm also was smiling when Dr. Yunis emphasized the roles and responsibility of supervisor. Indeed, you just imagine that, as an individual, myself and the rest of the panelists need to change and adapt and to remain resilient. But the responsibility or the burden of leader multiply more than that, because you are not only need to look after yourself, your family, but the organizations that you are heading and managing. So indeed, it is a challenging journey that we all go through, and as a leader, especially in the position that I am having, we're responsible for the conduct of training and learning of home team officers, regardless of where we are, either during the lockdown that we encountered many times, or during the migration to the hybrid working environment. So the challenges is all the time is there, changes is constant, but what is important, I just want to emphasize and impress, which is also resonate with what Dr. Yuni mentioned, the importance for leader in particular to communicate, to make it clear, to engage people that they're managing consistently so that they are aware and au fait with what is happening and what is the expectation and the requirement in the new dynamic working environment. Important also for the leader himself or herself to be open to changes and to be ready and to be adaptive to the needs. I think that, to me, based on my personal experience, is fundamental to take care of not only yourself, but to lead effectively the people that under your care. And of course, the other thing, the bread and butter, the Home Team Academy, how then we prepare, undertake, and execute the training and learning requirement for our officers, and as such that they have to learn from the old way of learning to the new way of learning virtually and eventually to the hybrid situation that we are in. Maybe I just pause here for a while.
Thank you, Mr. Anwar. Indeed, you have emphasized that the supervisor's role in helping the employees to cope with change and to transit to this hybrid work environment. Okay, and I think you specified the importance of leaders having to communicate clearly and to engage in a consistent manner. So thank you, Mr. Anwar, for sharing. So Dr. Yuni, in your earlier keynote, you have offered numerous concrete ways, for individuals as well as organizations to support employee occupational health and well-being. Just wondering if there are any other things that you want to add on or share that you weren't able to in your earlier keynote that you would like to emphasize in this panel discussion?
So I will be brief here because I don't want to repeat myself, and then I will be happy to address more questions later. But what I want to highlight is that actually, just like many organizations and people successfully navigated through this change, and then finding out the new ways of working, I think leaders can leverage these opportunities because many people perhaps feel more comfortable talking about work and non-work, having gone through this pandemic. So I think effective leaders can leverage this opportunity to initiate conversation first so that people can be more comfortable talking about this, and keeping in mind that people are different, even the way that people prefer to manage work and non-work, everyone have different preferences, and that's okay. And I think just leaders need to recognize individuals' diverse way of managing work and family and find a way to help each individual can be effective and flourish in their own way. And I think in that process, leaders' role is to recognize the demands and difficulty that are arising and support the adequate resources and reward so that the work can be satisfying.
Great, thank you, Dr. Yuni. Indeed, I think what you're referring to is probably the leaders having to take the initiative to have such conversations, because sometimes it can be indeed quite challenging for the subordinates themselves, for the employees to initiate such conversations, right? Okay, thank you, Dr. Yuni. Maybe later on when there are more questions, we would be we'd be really happy to hear perspectives on that. Okay, next on, I would like to, hand the time to Dr. Koh, because Dr. Koh works in the Singapore Public Service Division, and I think now we all understand we're moving to hybrid work arrangements, and that may be something that you specifically have gleaned from your work, experience in the public service, and I think we'll be really, really keen to hear what were some of the learnings and challenges that you have come across. Dr. Koh? Dr. Koh, yeah, maybe you can unmute yourself, sorry, you're muted.
Thank you, Yan-Lin.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, in the Singapore public sector, what we are trying to do now is to institutionalize work arrangement for those whose the nature of work allows it to be able to telecommute 2 days per work week. Telecommute means that working at a location other than the usual office. So it can be working from home, or it can be at co-working spaces that's nearer to where they stay. So that people can collaborate. You may say, why 2 days? Why not all 5 days, just like during the pandemic? Because I think we all recognize that social connections are important, right? And they still need to have that face time to build social connections. And it also means that we need to be more deliberate in how we design work. How we spend those times when we come back to the office and making the effort to connect with each other. And there are many factors to consider, right? It's not just having a policy to say that 2 days a week you can telecommute. We have to start by thinking about specific work activities. We have to think about the processes, the people involved, the space that we provide, as well as the technology enablers for those activities, so that the outcomes can be optimized. And I would say we are still in the beginning of this journey, and we are still learning. Just like to pick up on one of the keywords I mentioned in the chat just now, flexible. In fact, I think that flexibility is something that once experienced will be highly valued. So I think during the pandemic, people have experienced flexibility in how they allocate their time. And I think this ability to manage flexibility are especially valued by knowledge workers who generally, I would think, have higher self-efficacy in managing their work, non-work balance. And also flexibility is very important in the current context because of this trend we call the Great Resignation. In the US, in the first 5 months of this year, about 20 million people, or about 12% of the US workforce, have resigned. Some return to the workforce, some not. Even for those who return to the workforce, 2/3 actually move into a different field of work. As you can imagine, it's a tough time for employers. In the 70s, organizational scholars like Douglas Hall started talking about the career being residing in the individual rather than residing in an organization, because job security is going to be dead. And 50 years later, we are seeing that this generation of worker really embracing that paradigm. It creates problems for organizations, like what I say. But on the other hand, when we are able to adopt remote work or hybrid work arrangements, we actually allow certain groups who were previously disadvantaged by the pre-pandemic work arrangements, where you expect people to be 5 days in the office, and you allow them to enter or re-enter the workforce. For example, the Pew Charitable Trust found that in the US, the women employment gains actually outpaced that of men in the during the period from the second half of 2021 to the first quarter of 2022. So there's positive social impact in this trend, and it also, apart from increasing the labor supply, it also allows us to introduce diversity in the workforce, which is good for companies, but only if we are serious about locking in the gains. That means, you cannot remove the full flexibility, like what you might have read about what Elon Musk said, right, to his employees, that you should all come back to office, no more working from home. So I think it's important that we think about locking in the gains, redesigning the work, maintain the flexibility, and therefore keeping the workers engaged. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Koh. Indeed, actually, whatever you have shared, it really parallels or is aligned to what Dr. Yuni has shared. For example, the flexibility that you mentioned, it's also consistent with Dr. Yuni's emphasis for organization to recognize that there's diversity in how people work. Having that flexibility to calibrate the approaches based on the population that you're working with. And the point about mindfully redesigning the work, to harness the best parts, of this hybrid work arrangements, I think it reinforces Dr. Yuni's earlier point, in terms of like being intentional in providing the resources, the organization playing a crucial role to help the employees in adjusting to the new way of working. So really, thank you so much, Dr. Koh, for that very insightful sharing. Okay, and finally, we have Ms. Wendy. Ms. Wendy, your work involves supporting organizations across the regions through thought leadership, consultancy, and adult learning, and even training and development. Could you share with us, based on your foreseeable challenges and also what you have worked with across the different organizations, what are some of the best or useful practices that could enable us to better prepare for the future?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everybody around the world. Yeah, I just want to share 3 stories, and drawing on what Yune, Cheery, and Mr. Anwar has shared. Right, and the first story, it's around adaptability and change, right? And so some of the challenges that we face is, or organizations are facing, is we're now having to solve new problems. Right, when COVID hit, we haven't experienced this before, and we had to learn new ways of whether it is law enforcement, whether it is how we work. So everybody had to learn new ways. But the challenge that I hear from leaders is that people in feeling overwhelmed. We don't really learn very effectively, right? And sometimes people think that they can't learn, or there's some lamenting over it. And some challenges around on the other spectrum is people think that they know how to do it, right? Whereas what is actually happened is they don't know that they don't know. right? So with these like practical challenges around learning, we need to also see learning from new lens, right? So I thought to share the ABC, and the A is around activating learning agility. And that's really to go back to our fundamentals when it's about, us looking at how we want to, as Chini talked about the great resignation, how do we want to spend our time, our life, what's meaningful, right? This is a whole great reflection, right, of our purpose. So, and in my research, I find that that purpose drives learning, this continuous learning, because we believe that what we learn will make an impact, right? So I think one key area is helping people to connect their learning to their purpose. And the other factor is around the metacognitive ability, and that's to learn how we are learning, to reflect, to take a step back. And I think all too often we see learning as attending training, that we spend lots of time and resources on training, but perhaps not enough on helping people to take a step back, to look at how their reflection, the quality of their reflection, the quality of their application, how much do they intentionally go get feedback, how are they able to weave together their learning strategies so that their learning process is accelerated, versus like I attend training and it kind of stops there, right? So that's like the whole aspect around like activating our learning. So that's A, around activating learning agility, and B is around building connections through conversations. And again, that's what Uni talked about in terms of initiating conversations. And in the work that we have with various organizations, I think that the key challenge is we're all so busy. We're all so busy, and there's any space or time for conversations is squeezed out, and we focus on tasks, on what needs to be done, right? Versus connection, versus taking a pause to just know what is happening in the team. And especially I think with a hybrid way of working, connecting with people through a virtual platform is very, very different. And I can't understand why leaders are not asking their people to turn on their videos. And every time we do a meeting, just as we have our face-to-face meeting, we see one another. When we have our virtual meetings, we should also see one another, right? And so I think both leaders and professionals, we want to have these one-on-one conversations that connects, that gets people to talk about how they're feeling at work, right? To get a pulse of your team, whether it's their stress level, the family situation, or how they're dealing with their work demands. So I think this requires leaders and professionals also to have a different skill, because we always talk about work, but to talk about these matters of is really probably requires a different pacing, different types of questions, and different ways of connection. Yeah, and so that's B, around building connection through conversations. And I think the C that I want to talk about, right, is focusing on careers, looking at it from a portfolio perspective versus from a promotion perspective. And and we also talk about, increasing rewards, right, from a sense of like looking at careers. And I think that the challenge that organizations face, right, is we actually don't differentiate between performance reviews and performance and career conversations. And we think that I won't generalize, but some organizations think of performance reviews as career conversations, but they are very, very different, right? Because one is you have a grading A, B, C, right? Whereas the other one is much more future-oriented, much more exploratory. And performance is what has been done and what's in the past. So I think in this, right, the work is around helping people to see the difference, and also to help people reframe from looking at promotions to a portfolio of experiences, a portfolio of projects. And in that way, right, we can also expand how we can help our people grow, how we can help them see possibilities in their careers. So, and I think then from that perspective, we can better engage our staff, right? And not have them feel like stuck because they feel like they cannot be promoted, or to have them feel like, actually promotion may not be what I want, but, but I don't know what else. So I think part of this work, right, as we all examine our purpose, how we want to lead our work and our non-work, our work and our life, is it's around like our opportunities, right? How do we want to spend our time at work in a meaningful way that engages us, that also gets us to learn? I think so in the work with organizations is to help these career conversations to happen, so that people feel a sense of progression, people feel a sense of purpose, and they also can reignite their passion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wendy. Indeed, it's such a good summary, and it's so easy for us to remember with the ABCs. Yeah, activating learning, building conversations, and the career conversations, building connections, and then the career conversations that you mentioned about. Yeah, so we have already heard from all our 4 panelists, the brief sharing about this topic. We do have some questions. I think maybe what we can do is we could, I'm going to bring over one of the earlier questions from Dr. Yune's keynote, probably as a general one to start off this panelist discussion, which is this one on what are some key or critical changes that workplaces need to embrace to build up the resilience against the next or inevitable pandemic. So I think the pandemic, it's likely here to stay, and we've all talked about what have been some of the major changes, as well as what we might anticipate in the coming months or years. As discussed by the panel. So what are some of your thoughts, panelists, about any other changes that you think the workplace needs to embrace? Yeah, I can leave it to anyone.
Yeah,
I probably want to
maybe I
respond
start
first.
first.
Yes, Mr. Anwar.
Yeah,
sure, Mr.
I
Anwar.
think fundamentally, definitely this is not the last pandemic that's going to visit us. I hope the next one won't be so soon. But the challenge is how long is this current one going to last? Because it seems that we are in for a long ride. But I think fundamentally, in order to develop that resilience requirement, changes must occur to me, both at hardware and software. Okay, and I think as a leader, I think we mentioned earlier that it's important to understand the environment or the situation that we are in. That's where the facilitation of the estate requirement, example, if you're talking about hybrid working environment, which is where we are embarking on. I think for a start, that kind of environment must be facilitated so that there is no stress or tension when our personnel transit to the current new normal environment. So that to me, a baseline requirement, in terms of technology support, in terms of real estate requirement. On the other hand, it's also where the officers and the leaders must be equipped with the soft skill in terms of, we mentioned about importance of engagement, importance of connection, importance of clarity, and in terms of entire, I would say, wellness package that encompass all the other requirements, support system need to be developed, okay, and continue to be refined, because it entails changes along the way. And when we discover new things that we need to tighten, and that's where I think it's important that we need to be adaptable. So fundamentally, these are all the aspects. It's a baseline requirement, and we just adapt having that kind of requirement established. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anwar. Would any of the other panelists have any perspective to share with regard to this question in terms of what might be some of the key changes that we see embrace in future?
Yeah, I just want to respond. I think in terms of like to build up resilience, right, against the next inevitable pandemic, I think I just have one word, and I think the word is about relationships. Yeah, and it's very soft, but it's in times of crisis, we need to depend on one another. We need to be able to trust one another. Staff need to be able to trust their leaders, right? And leaders also need to trust their people to do their part and sometimes to go beyond. And in the stories that I've heard, right, from the organizations that we work with, it's in times of extreme stress, it is the people that help one another get through it. And then the question is, how do we build strong relationships in this hybrid world, right? In this world where people are so busy and we're so, somewhat disconnected. Yeah, so I think that's the work that we need to do.
Thank you, Ms. Mandy, for your sharing. Dr. Yuni, you have something to share?
Yeah, I can chime in. I think tying the 2 points together. So I think leaders' role in this relationship building is, of course, very important. And I think leaders can get back to their core. So leaders' role, to me, as I view, is that they help employees to succeed, and by creating the structure. And in the changing world of the work, that structure, for example, make it the expectation very clear. For example, when my team is going to work in hybrid manner, what is my expectation about the frequency of the communication or quality of the communication? And there is actually recent research looking at this supervisors' initiative to creating the expectation indeed leads to the productivity during the pandemic. So the getting to the core of the leader's role really help the structured work is one way. And the other one is to show the concerns for the employees. So this directly relates to the relationship building. So as a leader, we need to express that the employees can depend on us, and I, as a leader, understand the difficulties that each individual, very diverse background, how the difficulties that they experience in managing work and non-work. So showing this kind of concern and help them to navigate through, I think in this context, the leader's role is very important.
Great, thank you, Dr. Yuni. Dr. Koh?
Just add an anecdote. Some years ago, I've got some HR leader telling me that I cannot implement telecommuting in my organization because if the staff were to stay at home, I don't know whether he or she is working, right? We hear this a lot. But the point is that if there is work, then the person will be working, right? If you have a timeline to the work, then the person will be working. So I think it's very important to be disciplined about how we design work, how we assign work, how we track work, because really trust cannot be built if you have fundamental worry about whether this person will be working, if he or she were to be at home. So that's the link. So we think about the flexible work arrangements on the one hand, which is employee-centric. At the organizational level, we have to think about how we need to redesign work. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Koh. Thank you, panelists, for your responses to the first question. We have another question from the audience, which is, what does the future of work mean for the skills and training of workers and leaders? There's a note that Mr. Anwar's earlier point that this impacts largely knowledge workers. So I think this question from the audience is asking, so what it means for skills-based then, or labor-based jobs? Will those jobs need to be future-proof as well?
Yeah, maybe I can pick up from where I left. And based on what Wendy mentioned earlier in terms of the importance and training and learning, the reality to me, and I think to most of us, is that COVID has emphasized the importance of lifelong learning. The importance of unlearn, relearn, and learn. Of course, certain sectors are very paramount, but if you look at it in totality, in order to remain current, for the current needs and in future, people really need to upskill and reskill, regardless of which area you are in. Likewise, Dr. Koh mentioned about the Great Resignation. When people decided that I had enough of this area, I wanted to venture into a new area because it's a new passion that I discovered during the lockdown. They had to do something about their skilling. So I think the importance of lifelong learning, pandemic has really put it to the forefront. That no matter what you want to do, you really need to skill yourself to go into that area for you to, to be happy where you are. So to me, important about learn, relearn, and upskilling is transcends across all sectors.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Anwar. I think you raised a very interesting point about the fact that the learning may not necessarily be just directly concerning the immediate work that you're doing, but rather it's just going beyond, picking up new skills, extend beyond your current work domain. That part about that you mentioned earlier, and I thought that was very, very interesting. Dr. Koh, I think you have something to add.
Yeah. Just to agree with Mr. Anwar and to add to his point, we often talk about 70-20-10, the recognition that much of the learning actually takes place on the job. And I think through the pandemic, through people switching jobs, there's emerging, researchers who are getting more interested in this idea of people changing jobs and deliberately expose themselves to new work environment to stretch themselves, right? They call it bold moves. And I think, to retain employee, organizations can actually try to initiate such equivalent of bold moves within the organization, which is to facilitate posting around, right? So the person doesn't stay in the job for longer than the time that the person can learn and be productive. So I think having that kind of system in place will allow people to move around and to learn and to maintain that flexibility and adaptability. So that's from the organizational side. Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, and if I may just chime in, it's really interesting because in my PhD research, I interviewed 25 career switchers, and I also did a quantitative survey with about 340 working professionals. So we look at the growth outcomes, and there were 3 growth outcomes. One is people who engage in learning. They have, of course, expanded capabilities, more skills. They also have a deeper sense of identity. That means we don't define ourselves as, I am an engineer, right? Or I am a policeman, for example. But you might define yourself at a more fundamental level. So one of the person I interviewed defined herself as a creator. So she creates softwares. So she was a software developer. And she also creates music. She was a music producer, and she basically creates new products. Yeah, so this a deeper sense of identity, and in this way we won't be so easily shaken by changes because we don't define ourselves by our job. Yeah, and the third outcome is actually around growth, around the sense of engaged employability, the sense that I can learn to make a difference in my own career, and therefore they feel happier, they feel more empowered. So the research shows that people with more varied job experiences, so across functions, across functional roles and across industries, they have a higher correlation with these growth outcomes that I spoke about. Right, versus people who are on the other extreme, only in one function, one industry. Yeah, so that's one of the data points. And the other data point is around workplace learning and workplace learning conditions. So there are 4 conditions that came out. One is around a supportive manager, right? Maybe this could be a pop quiz for so which of the 4 factors do we think predicts learning? So a boss, a guiding boss, a team that learns together, the organization, systems and processes, or a learning-rich job. Yeah, so I'll be very curious, right? So and actually I thought that it's a manager because we all emphasize about the role of the manager. But to Dr. Koh's point, it's actually about the job. Because when we have a learning-rich job, a job that compels us to get out of our comfort zone in order to learn new skills, in order to be successful, then that basically pushes our learning, it propels our learning. Then with a learning-rich job, then the manager, the team, and the organization can come in to support. Which also means without a learning-rich job, if we continue to do routine stuff, then the impetus for learning is much reduced.
Thank you, Ms. Wendy. for the sharing and your points that you have raised. And I think it resonates with a lot of people, in the audience, in terms of getting us to reflect whether we have always been in a very singular function or whether it's time for us to actually step out of our comfort zone and, take on different new and varied job functions. Thank you, Ms. Mandy, for that. Yeah. I think maybe I would move on to the next question because we have a couple that are new ones that have streamed in. And one of this is quite interesting. It's a very specific question. I wanted to ask if the future of work means less need for office space, and if we will see a trend of organizations moving towards the virtual office space in the metaverse. Again, to any of the panelists, you would like to share or respond to this question? Less need for office space.
Maybe I bring Home Team Academy context, for sharing. I mean, the entire campus is designed, to accommodate such kind of numbers and purposes. Definitely, for sure, during COVID lockdown, the entire place almost empty. Okay, you suddenly have a ghost town where people literally at home, except for the key personnel staff, need to maintain certain essential. Then we transit into a hybrid working environment, and now we are in a hybrid working environment. So the reality is that as a public service, we are guided by certain consideration of working environment of 3 working day and 2 working from home, or with certain flexibility. So at the end of the day, yes, I think there could be some impact in terms of workspace environment requirement, where I think the public service is embarking on working from anywhere. Not necessarily from your current office in certain part of Singapore. I think it's in a pipeline where public servant will be allowed to occupy any of those dedicated places where facilitation is being provided for them to work. I think that's the nature in which we are transgressing. That definitely there will be some impact in terms of real estate. But the reality is also when we need to bring back people, we also need to factor that requirement. So I think that's where the flexibility and the dynamism need to be factored in.
Indeed, thanks, Mr. Anwar. Just wondering if any of the other panelists have any points to add.
Just like to add to Mr. Anwar's point very quickly. I think whether it's more space or less space, I think the key point is that we probably need a reconfiguration of some of the existing space. 1 cubicle per person. That was the traditional model, and organizations are moving away from that. I think that there were a time when hot desking is not new. It's been around for 20 years, 30 years. But I think in the past, when you have hot desking and yet you compel people to come back to the office almost on a daily basis, you encounter resistance. But if you combine hot desking with flexible kind of work arrangements, I think it'll be quite different. So that's one level, which I think is still quite micro. But the larger point is that we need to have spaces that are more adaptable to new needs, that you can readily configure it. Like meeting room these days is no longer just meeting rooms. You need video conferencing equipment in those meeting rooms, and that's the tech part that I talked about earlier. So it's that mindfulness as we redesign the work, also that mindfulness in redesign the space and the tech that we need to use. Thanks.
I will just quickly add on. My guess is that in the future, the office space will be purposefully driven to nurture the social relationship at work. So we have experienced that at least for the knowledge workers, we have learned, and at least in each employee's mind, we have proof that we can work from home. So I think a lot of people will not think the office as the space that I get my work done, but perhaps I purposely go there to socialize, to discuss, to brainstorm, so that I create synergy with my team members, and that's what the physical office space is going to be. That would be my guess.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Yuni. Okay, I thought when we were talking about this new possibility of virtual space, I thought I can actually lead into the next question, which is about innovative practices. So this question to the panelists would be, have there been innovative practices you have come across from other leaders or organizations? This one is to keep sight of staff's well-being and to keep them engaged in the evolving work arrangements. What might some examples be? This is really about keeping sight and monitoring staff's well-being.
Yeah, I think the other prominent feature to me is definitely innovation during this current time. You have to be innovative to engage your people who are in the virtual world. I think that's part of the whole mental well-being care that we constantly are mindful that we need to do so. So how then, as what Eunice mentioned, that when in the absence of physical interaction, do we stay connected with our staff? And also to impress upon them that we care for them. So now, during that lockdown period, we do have a lot of care packs being, initiated where, people, we send certain goodies just to stay connected. We do have a virtual lunch together, during certain session. So that's where, to me, actually where innovation really is at the forefront. Then the next question is then how then we make it very clear in terms of the work-life balance in the virtual world. So to me, that's another example of where actually we have created an environment, ensure that the welfare and the needs of our people is constantly being cared and looked after.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Alba. Ms. Wendy?
Yeah, I want to share a great practice that we learned in our work with leaders. And so this leader shared that once in every 2 weeks, he has a 20-minute one-on-one session, 20-minute one-on-one engagement conversation. And in this conversation, he asked his people every 2 weeks, right? He will ask them for their happiness score, 1 to 10, right? Where would you place your happiness score? How is it in the organization? Of course, he weaves it in the conversation, right? It's not so clinical, right? So there's some skill involved in this, yeah. But he actually does keep his notepad of the scores, and then when there's a deviation in the happiness level, he follows up. He asks, what's been happening at home, at work. Yeah, and he also asked some very brave questions, I thought, because it's not just about how are you, right? Because usually when in some cultural context, when you ask how are you, the answer is I'm okay, and that's a conversation stopper. Yeah, so we ask questions like, in the last month, what has led you to be happy and engaged or inspired, right? And if they take a long time to answer, then that's an answer as well. And we also ask a question, which basically gets to the heart of the issue, which is, have you had thoughts of moving on or looking for something else? And it's a really hard question to ask because sometimes we don't really want to hear the answer, but yet it's such an important question because if you want to keep to the pulse of the team. So that's like a story that I've heard from a manager. And I think the other one, right, is around team routines. So Mr. Awaz talked about the care packs and the virtual team meetings. But how do we structure care in everyday practices? So every day we have meetings, right? But every day the meetings, well, a lot of meetings squeeze the life out of us. So how can we use meetings as a vehicle for team engagement? So a simple one could be like, connect before content. To start a meeting with a feeling word, how are you feeling? And just going through a feeling word for everybody with everybody's videos turned on, then you get a good sense, right? Some of them will say that they're stressed, or they are unhappy, or they are feeling at peace or feeling excited. So just simple team routines can help us to structure care in our everyday work.
Wow, thank you, Ms. Wendy, for really sharing some of these very innovative practices. Maybe some I could even try with my own team back in PPSD in our department. Yeah, thanks, Ms. Wendy. Dr. Koh, I think you have something to add?
Just to add on quickly, I think it's about psychological safety. So when work and non-work boundaries are becoming blurred, It will be unrealistic to expect the worker to come to work like a robot. So they have to feel that it's okay that they are treated as a person. They need to deal with things in their personal life. And I think this is the part where the modeling of the supervisors or bosses are very important. I think if bosses are quite open in sharing, when so one good practice in my organization is that the bosses have no qualms when they say, oh, I need to take leave tomorrow because my child is sick, or I need to bring the child his first day of school. If supervisors model this kind of behavior, it actually sends the message to the staff that it's okay. It's okay. And then you need to couple that with, like what I mentioned earlier, there's a good tracking of work, so it doesn't affect work outcomes. So you combine the two together, actually, then you can create that kind of environment where they feel that I can be engaged by the work and at the same time look after my personal needs. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Koh. There's a very, I think, again, this naturally leads on to my next question from the audience, because this question was, we seem to be emphasizing on the future of work to be equal to digitalization, adopting technology, and equating that skill of adaptability. But I think hearing the panel, it appears that the panel is also saying that we should also be looking at learning and enhancing soft skills, because we talk about trust, we talk about communication, we talk about engagement. So any thoughts from the panelists in terms of how we can now encourage people to pick up these skills beyond the digitalization and tech skills that we're so familiar with? Yeah.
Looks like I have to start first, best as home team.
Yeah, it seems like the trend, Mr. Anwar.
The home team bread and butter core business. Yeah, indeed. I think, as I mentioned earlier, other than the hardware, the software is very important. Especially now, we zoom the focus on the leaders. I think the future of leaders is basically going to change and evolve. We talked just now the importance of being agile, being adaptive, being able to appreciate the changes immediately and react on it. I think that's the type of leader that we are looking at for current and even more in future. So then how then we develop that? I think it cannot be an overnight, for sure. But what to me has really the impetus is that the environment that we are operating in has somewhat nudged and pushed the leaders to change the way in which leadership is being done previously and now. Because if you don't change, you are in big, big trouble. Not only personally, but as a leader of an organization that you have a responsibility to look after. So definitely soft skill is very important. We talk about trust. I just want to connect back to the earlier discussion that trust cannot be built just like that. It takes time to develop, and how then we develop is through the interaction. Connectivity, then the environment of psychology safety that Dr. Koh Chee mentioned would exist. It would not exist automatically. It has to be based on trust, when you feel safe that you can talk freely, without any repercussion. So yes, I think paramount for the development of future leadership, these are the important soft skills that definitely the home team officers and leaders will be inculcated and developed.
Thank you, Mr. Anwar, for again responding to this question first. And it's given, I think, some time for the other panelists to see whether you have consolidated any of your thoughts, whether you have any response. Dr. Yuni? Yeah,
concerning specifically for the work-non-work balance, leaders can also be trained to be supportive for the employees' family needs. So research suggests that there are different behaviors that leaders can engage in to signal that the leaders take the work-family balance issues seriously. And those are showing the emotional support, so that you can be the the listening person, hear it out, and show the empathy, and then the instrumental support. So in case the employee need to, for example, take the sick child, stay with the sick child, or take the elderly parent to the medical appointment, So you make an arrangement to help the employee. And then another one is Dr. Ko mentioned, the role modeling behavior. So you are the person who sets the tone. So maybe you role model, you don't contact employees after hours, you share the reasons, non-work related reasons for taking a leave, etc., etc. And the last one is more proactive and creative work-family management. So this goes back to earlier point. For example, as a leader, even when the normal times, I may cross-train my employees so that when the crisis come along, my team can be more resilient. So that, for example, one employee is absent because of the family-related reason, my team is gonna be less affected. So these are some of the examples of the behaviors that leaders can be trained, and perhaps as the work-life balance issues are gonna be more important in the future, this might be one of the key soft skills that leaders can be trained on, in addition to other technical skills that we usually train the leaders for.
Yeah, if I may just chime in, I hear a lot about we need leaders play an important role, and indeed they do, and the skill of leaders, the cultivation of leaders is so important in creating the culture. In our work, I also realized that leaders are human beings, and leaders need our support. Leaders need our care, and to feel like so I feel like sometimes we put a lot of burden on the leaders. And I feel like I wonder, this is a hypothesis, what if we were to shift the expectations that we have of leaders to care, to support, as a something that everybody would have, as good human beings, treat others the way we want to be treated. And if we activate every single employee, right, to take that stance of ownership, that I can lead from my capacity, from wherever I am, so that I can also contribute and support my leader. And in that way, everybody supports one another. And I feel that that's a bit more sustainable, because leaders are under a lot of stress.
I think if I may add on, that's the reality of being a leader, burden of leadership.
Yeah, I feel it when I work with the leaders.
I think many leaders in our midst will feel very empathized by whatever that Ms. Wendy, indeed, it's actually not a very easy position or role to be in, when you're in leaders, especially when you're dealing with, fellow human beings, relationships, that it comes up and arises in your work. It's not just dealing with robots, on systems or processes. Yeah. I think in the interest of time, unfortunately, I couldn't give a heads up, because I think this final question really got a lot of the responses from Mr. Anwar and also the panelists right here. So unfortunately, I have to wrap up the questions. But of course, if there are some questions that are unanswered, I'm not sure whether some of our panelists can also just respond in the panel. Right. So actually, right now, in that, I thank you so much, panelists, for having this very fruitful discussion among yourselves and so sharing your thoughts with us. And to wrap up this session, I thought, I want to ask each panelist, just a very quick one. What's this final piece of advice, you would like to give the audience on how organizations and leaders can better prepare for the future of work? What is that one, key thing? I know there might be a lot, but what is it? If you want us to remember, and remember tonight before we go to bed.
I think coming from the training and learning, to me, the one important thing is learning is a lifelong learning. You really have to learn to evolve, to adapt, and eventually to handle the situation and be prepared for it.
Thank you, Mr. Anwar. What about Ms. Wendy, Dr. Yuni?
I'll go second. Yeah. My one thing is that it's okay to be different. It's okay to be integrator. It's okay to be segmenter. It's okay to value family more. It's okay to value work more. And as an organization and leaders, we need to create the environment for people to be okay to be different and successful regardless.
Thank you, Dr. Uni.
I guess I have two sentences, which is find your purpose and create your playground.
Thank you, Ms. Wendy.
I think from the organizational point of view, I think people, whether it's employers or generally people, we are hampered by the options these days to customize our own experiences. So I think increasingly employees at work will want to be treated as an individual rather than just one in a group of people. And I think that will be the burden of leadership that we talked about just now. You know, and really then the role of the supervisor is to provide the clarity of work on what is supposed to be achieved, and perhaps also clarity on what are the desired behaviors at work. Beyond that, you know, we need to allow some customization, the employees to design their own work experience to some extent. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Koh. Thank you, panelists, really, for the insightful and thought-provoking discussion. You know, I believe many in the audience have benefited from your sharing. You know, I think personally for myself, you know, when we look at the topic, the future of work, you know, sometimes the work can sound very, you know, mechanic or something that's not very personable. But I'm really happy that, you know, through this panel discussion, we have personalized this experience of work. I think the panelists, across your various sharings, you have thought about how the selves need to develop their insight to our own inclinations. But you also emphasize on the role of leaders and organizations in being intentional to have such conversations. There were a lot of C's that came up actually. For us to embrace and adapt to change, we need to have constant conversations. We need to have connections with the people, you know, and this is probably how we can encourage our employees to achieve, you know, that adaptability, you know, to the future workforce. I'm really glad that we have the 4 panelists, you know, spending this evening with us. We had a wonderful 1-hour session, you know, and I'm very sure all the audience here, you know, if they can unmute themselves, you know, probably I'll give you a warm round of applause to thank you for the time and the perspective that you have shared. Yeah, so once again, thank you very much for your insights. Okay, so to all who have you know, been with us to the end of today's evening, we have come to the end of day 3 of ACOP 2022, and we certainly hope you have found the sessions today fruitful. We are keen to know how you felt about the presentations and what else we can do to make subsequent ACOP conferences more enjoyable. There is a feedback form on the sidebar of the conference platform, and could we get you to fill up the form with your honest feedback? So thank you very much. Now for the last announcement. The first series of presentations for tomorrow will commence at 1600 hours, 4 p.m. Singapore time. We hope our local and regional friends have a restful evening, and our counterparts in the other parts of the world would have a fruitful remainder of the day ahead. So thank you, and we see you back here tomorrow. Thank you, panelists, again. Thank you, everyone. Good night.